Good morning. You are listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. You can also stream it live at ksfr.org. My name is Paul Gibson. I'm the host of Retake Our Democracy, and I'm speaking with the other co-founder of Retake Our Democracy, my esteemed wife, Roxanne Barber. And we will be discussing the 2022 legislative session. And rather than just describing the status of the bills we're supporting, what we're going to do is take a deep dive into 2 or 3 bills, and from that, hopefully illustrate some of the challenges of working within the legislative system the way it operates today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Last week, I spoke with Mary Feldblum, the heroic leader of the Health Security for New Mexicans campaign, as she laid out what the Health Security Act goals are for this session and how they plan to achieve them. It was a very interesting conversation, and you can listen to that and all of our other radio shows or watch them by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. Very easy to find. And if you're driving around today and missed some of this show, you can find this show also at the same spot. I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land and thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn a good deal from them. I also want to remind you that the 2022 legislative session is over half over.
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks. 2 weeks from today is the last day. We're recording this on Thursday. So this session, Retake Our Democracy is doing the same system we have in the past. We have an alert system and we have huddles. And the alert system, if you sign up on our website, and it says Get Action Alerts, just click on that. And whenever one of the bills we're supporting is being heard in a committee or on the floor, you'll get notification with speaking points on that bill and a bill summary and contact information for the legislators who will be hearing that bill. And so it's designed to help you make it easier for you to be part of the legislative process. It also includes information about how you can log in on Zoom and offer public comment during those hearings. So in addition to our alert system, we also operate our huddles, our weekly huddles. We first started doing that last year, and they're back by popular demand. We do them from 6 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday evenings. And you can sign up for our huddles by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on New Mexico legislation in the menu bar, and it should be right at the top of the page, the registration information. The huddles are really a great opportunity for you to really learn how the legislative process works. We go into great depth about what happened the week before and what's coming, and we hone our strategies, our communication and advocacy strategies during those sessions.
And express our frustrations.
And express our frustrations and our celebrations.
Yes.
Yes, because we've had lots to celebrate already. So that's enough announcements. Let's get started. Welcome, Roxanne. And for today's show, Roxanne will be playing the host and ask me questions and amplify on my responses. So let's get started.
Okay. So before we start talking about specific bills today, let's discuss briefly how we decide which bills we're going to support and how challenging that can be to limit the number of bills.
Yeah, even before bills start to be announced, we get wind of what's coming either from legislators or from allies. And so we start to formulate a list of bills that we're looking for. They aren't bills yet, they're concepts. And so we're looking for bills, and we have a team of people who are scanning all of the bills that are introduced. There are over 700 bills introduced in this session. So that's a big task of combing through all those bills. And the way in which our criteria, I'm not going to try and go through all of our criteria, but the basics of the criteria is, does the bill have a big impact on an underserved population in relation to either climate justice, economic justice, social justice, or racial justice? And then we also weigh in with our allies and get their support or help, advice as to whether or not which bills we should support. We tend to shy away from bills that are slam dunks that are going to just sail through unanimously, and focus on bills that are may need a push to get them to the finish line.
That need extra advocacy.
Yeah.
And can I just clarify, Paul, that when we say our allies, we are talking usually about frontline organizations, social justice, economic justice, environmental justice organizations, people like New Energy Economy,
Mexico Voices for Children,
Somos un Pueblo Unido, and many, many others across the state.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. So once we get this year we were really trying to keep our list of bills to 15, but you get to 15 and then 25 bills get introduced in a day, and 10 of them look like, how could we not support that bill? So Roxanne, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we have to keep it down to 15 or 20? And this year we didn't make it, we've got 25.
Well, we're a small team of people. I mean, we have thousands of advocates that rely on us for information and motivation, I might say, across the state. But the core work is really done by Paul and I and a couple of other very devoted and excellent volunteers. And that core work is combing through all the bills as they're introduced, seeing if they fit our criteria. Then we once we choose bills to support, there's a lot of work involved with each one. We have to do research. We have to write not just a bill summary, but talking points with research that supports why the bill is good for our state. That's very time consuming. We have to build that up on our website. And then once the session starts, we have to track each bill through each committee, when it's being heard, contact information for the committee, getting those talking points out there. We send out our legislative alerts to a couple thousand people, giving them all the information they need to engage, to support, and sometimes to oppose bills. So it's each bill is very time consuming. So we tried to keep it to 15 this year. We weren't very successful. But
no, we're at 25.
We've done like 40 in past years.
Right, we're at 25, but we decided to also create a list of bills that we support but are not tracking, and we have 20 more bills like that. So it's really 45 bills.
Over 20, right. Bills that are really great bills, but we just don't have the capacity to actively advocate for them. Okay. Where do you want to go now?
You're going to ask me about all the bills we're supporting, which are the most. Oh, yeah, I need to just take a quick break and remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR. I always forget to do this, so Roxanne was right to point to me to do it. I probably should have done it a little later. But the KSFR is a wonderful radio station, and especially in this age of disinformation and misinformation, they provide real information. And but they do it on a shoestring budget, and if you can afford to part with 10 or 20 or 50 bucks, I'd recommend you go to ksfr.org and click on their donate button and view it as your ticket for admission to a range of great bills.
And I'm sorry for the shuffling of the papers.
Yes.
Okay, so now let's talk about, of all the bills we have decided to support this year, which are you most pleased with progress?
Well, it's easy to pick out one, and I'm going to go into a good deal of depth about this because I think it illustrates how effective advocacy works. And that's HB 132, the bill that would reduce the cap on small loans, storefront loans, to 36%. I'm not going to go into great detail about why that's a good thing, just to tell you that the existing rate cap is 175%. That should be enough motivation for anybody to understand why it needs to be changed and reduced.
I mean, you have to be desperate to get money loaned to you at 175%. And that's exactly what those people are.
So how come we haven't been able to pass something that, you know, if you read Milan Simonich, he writes repeatedly about how this should be a no-brainer and what's wrong with Democratic leadership. Well, there's a number of things that are illustrative about why it is so hard to get something like this done. First of all, there is furious lobbying on the part of the lending industry.
The payday loan. industry.
Payday loan, and it's called storefront lending, it's called payday lending, it's called small lending,
It's called predatory lending.
it's called predatory lending. That's my term. I like that. But there's furious lobbying on their part to get this to stop any cap on lending rates.
And campaign contributions as
Right,
well to
right.
legislators.
And that they're very good at misinformation about how only they can address the needs of desperately poor New Mexicans. And let's face it, there are desperately poor New Mexicans, and often they're in need of a loan. And so legislators who hear those assertions and have legitimate concerns that their constituents may have no other option are inclined to waffle on imposing
A lower percentage
lower
rate.
percentage rate.
Mhm.
In 2021, a Senate bill, SB 66, set a rate cap of 36%, and it sailed through the Senate. We thought we were going to get it done that year. It passed unamended through the Senate and its first House committee hearing, but was ambushed in House Judiciary Committee. It was amended to 99% cap on loans under $1,000, which is the majority of loans given by storefront lenders. And so, again, apologies about the rustling of paper. But and then the bill just ran out of time. There had to be a consensus between the Senate and its 36% bill and the House and its 99% bill. And the committee that was charged to do that consensus, headed by Patty Lundstrom, never even met, and the bill died. This year has been much different for two really important reasons, and I'm going to lay this out. And so the first different reason was that the organizers and advocates in support of the bill paid close attention to what happened last year and did a meticulous job of countering what opposition they were going to be hearing. And so, for example, in the hearing, they had the head of the Credit Union Association, for the whole state, as one of the expert witnesses. And he described in detail how credit unions can offer these loans at 36%. In the year prior, advocates had said that they could do this, but this was hearing directly from the credit unions. And it wasn't just the head of the credit unions, but sprinkled through public comment was one credit union manager after another testifying that they offer those loans at 36% on a regular basis and that you don't have to be a member of a credit union to get it. So they anticipated what was going to be said in opposition, and they took away those arguments before they ever had a chance to surface. They also had data from a state report that clearly showed how many borrowers need 2 and 3 additional loans just to keep up with their initial loan. And then I thought one of the most compelling pieces of public comment was a former employee of a storefront lender who outlined exactly how the lender entices borrowers to take out more than they need and to take second and third loans, essentially just enslaving them to a whole series of loans that cascade in amount.
Right, and didn't he say people would come in to pay off their loan, and while they were there to pay off their loan, they would entice them into taking another loan? Don't you want some money right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. And can I just point out, Paul, that this is not just an economic justice issue, social justice, it's racial justice too, because these payday lenders are clustered in the poorest parts of our state, and that is often near Native American communities. I think there's the largest concentration of them in Gallup, and there's one payday lender for every 500 people or something ridiculous like that. Don't quote me on that. I don't have the numbers exactly right, but it's not much different than that.
So the testimony itself was really, really powerful. But none of this testimony would have even been possible without the artful maneuvering of the House leadership, specifically Speaker Egolf. The governor had not put predatory lending on the call, so it seemed all efforts to put a cap on the existing 175% rate would have to wait until 2023. But HB 132 was written to include an allocation, which enabled it to be deemed germane by the speaker. The bill's sponsor, Representative Susan Herrera, quickly amended the bill at its first committee hearing and stripped it of its allocation, preventing it from having to be sent over to House Appropriations, where Chair Lundstrom would have killed it, tabling it.
And Representative Lundstrom has the highest dollar amount of campaign contributions from the payday lending industry, isn't that correct?
That is correct. And so then hours before its crucial hearing in the House Judiciary Committee, that's the committee where it had been sacked in 2020, the speaker added Representative Debbie Armstrong to the committee, a strong supporter of caps at 36%. You could see the faces of those in opposition. They just went, they paled. They knew the game was over and that the bill was going to pass no matter what they had to say. The gig was up or the jig was up? It was up, though. It was very,
I think it's jig.
It was priceless to see the expression on a couple of legislators who knew that they had been outfoxed.
So the other day,
it passed House Judiciary without amendment and goes to the House floor.
At 36%.
And there could still be some shenanigans there, but it's pretty clear that the speaker has lined this up and expects it to pass the House floor. And even if it doesn't, there's still time because it'll go to the Senate where it'll get fixed and returned, and there's time for consensus.
Well, I hope there's been enough public shaming in the media and by others for these Democrats to get this through without raising that rate up to 99%. Okay, so that's one of the biggest wins so far, although it's not a win quite yet. What's been your biggest disappointment during the session so far, Paul?
Well, I have to say it's two bills, and I think they failed for related reasons, and that's public banking and the Green Amendment. Both of these bills had been introduced in 2020 and suffered the same fate in 2022, although the Green Amendment still has a second chance in the Senate because they had two bills introduced. They have a companion bill in the Senate that has still not been heard. Advocates for both bills did a tremendous job building legislator support for the bills, adding sponsors and supporting legislators who were supporting the bill. But I think it was the Green Amendment had like 22 sponsors. That's a lot of sponsors. Both used the interim hearings to clarify what their bills were about and what they would do. And both had really strong grassroots support from organizations like Yucca, Retake Our Democracy, New Energy Economy, Earth Care, and an array of indigenous groups. So they'd done really good homework, but I don't think they did as good a job as the HB 132 advocates of anticipating what the opposition was going to raise.
The arguments
against, and then take them away. And so they got hammered with the same arguments that hammered them in 2020. And both bills were defeated in their first committee. And so, I think this points to the public banking had an additional challenge, and that is that even if it had passed out of its first committee, it needed to get an appropriation from House Bill 2, which is managed by Representative Lundstrom. And despite repeated efforts to meet with her during the summer and fall, they were unable to do that. And HB 2 did not include an allocation for public banking.
And Lundstrom is not a fan of public banking.
No, that's another place where she gets a lot of donations from the banking industry.
From the bigger banks, yeah.
And so in its first House hearing, Chair Maestas asked if it had received an allocation, and when the bill's sponsors said no, he just said, well, then this is going nowhere, and so we're going to need to stop it here. We don't want to pass on a bill to another committee when it has no chance to advance. And this points to a really important issue, and that is that the House Appropriations Committee has an inordinate amount of power to determine policy by just not including funding for bills that are important. We saw this with the Water Data Act last year. We've seen it repeatedly with bills that are very good bills and effectively pass as unfunded mandates. And it was required of the Health Security Act last year because it saw its fate as dying in House appropriations with no funding. So they used junior money funding, which is an interesting topic in itself, but they raised $700,000 in junior funding to allow their planning and design process to proceed. And they raised another $800,000 this year to do the same thing. But the bottom line is not everybody can artfully maneuver that. And so if it's not in the budget, then it's not going anywhere. And that is almost entirely up to Representative Patty Lundstrom.
Who's chair of House Appropriations.
Right.
Finance,
And
right?
so that's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed.
Right. So let's talk a little bit, maybe give some more examples of how people in the legislature who are in those leadership positions, those positions of power, the influence they can have sometimes to get bills passed and sometimes some really good bills, but also to kill bills. What are some of the other things that we've learned about that, Paul?
Well, what I'm going to focus on are some of the systemic issues. And some of these are just blatantly obvious. The time is too short and legislators without staff can't possibly be adequately prepared to vote on every bill. One rep entered a hearing after all the discussion had been heard. This happened yesterday. And as she came into the room, she just said, "What bill am I voting on?" And before casting a vote, that was before she cast a vote, but she voted without even hearing any of the expert testimony or public comment. And in her defense, she was in another committee hearing presenting one of her bills. And this happens all the time. And you just simply can't have legislators making huge decisions like this with no time to be deliberate about it.
Well, let's hope she had done her homework, but knowing how much they have on their plate and having no staff to do research or any work for them, maybe not.
And there's other issues as well. Because of the time crunch and their inability to necessarily pay as much attention to public comment and so forth, and they rely too often on lobbyists or pressure from leadership or just very incomplete information. And that's no way to be making important decisions. Hearings are scheduled in such a way that, and they're posted late, which makes it very difficult for advocates to plan for and be present during hearings. And very often schedules like on Friday, yesterday, 2 Social Security bills are being heard in separate committees at the same time. Well, obviously the constituents concerned about both of those bills are interested in both bills, but they can't be in 2 places at once.
Right, one's a House committee, one's a Senate.
And it doesn't even matter if they're both in the House, because you can only be in one hearing at a time.
Yeah.
And so that is a structural problem that just absolutely needs to be addressed. And then just the way that a hearing goes, you get 1 minute of testimony, sometimes 2, depending on the hearing and the size.
Whether you're in favor or opposed.
Right, both sides are in the same situation, but the bill sponsors have as much time as they want to lay out why they want this bill and why it's important. And so if you're in opposition, you then have a minute, and so along with maybe 30 or 40 other people, but that's very hard to coordinate so that you have covered all the issues as to the reasons why a bill should not be supported or should be supported. And it's just not deliberate. And so what we heard, so for example, in last session, before this year, was in relation to the predatory lending bill. We heard community banks talking about how they're the only ones in the state that that they make all kinds of loans in the state, but they can't possibly make loans at 36%. And the credit unions couldn't either. And despite the fact that advocates and bill sponsors asserted that the credit unions actually do make those loans, that fell on deaf ears. And there's not an opportunity to stop frame the conversation and actually get down to the truth. And so people are voting on the basis of the last word or just incomplete information or
Right.
misinformation.
When you're limited to a minute, I mean, there's no rebuttal, there's no time for questions. People speak. I mean, unless you're brought in as an expert
Right.
by the bill sponsor, you have your 1 minute. Nobody asks you any questions. There's no chance to rebut if somebody misinterprets what you said. It's just not a good system.
So I talked a little bit about how with leadership in your court, you can get something done. That happened in the House with Speaker Egolf and the lending bill. But I haven't even touched on two of the most important bills in the session, and that's the Clean Future Act and the Hydrogen Hub. And both of those are strongly supported by leadership and the governor. And in that instance, we're finding that it's like a steamroller effect. While we were able to get the hydrogen hub tabled, it is being resurrected, we were told, and going to be inserted into the Clean Future Act. Or if not that, it'll be inserted into some dummy bill and reintroduced, and undoubtedly given a more favorable committee path than going through it.
Well, the governor was very unhappy when that bill got tabled last week on Friday.
But when in that instance, especially in relation to the Clean Future Act, that hearing was an exercise in total frustration, as the bill sponsors just basically didn't answer any questions. They just spoke what they wanted to say and didn't answer questions, didn't address concerns, just said we can get tax credits for this, we can get tax credits for that, it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring jobs. But none of the responses related to concerns about environmental impact. And that's a story for another day, but look for that to be resurrected. I just need to acknowledge that we're running out of time now. And so we want to conclude the show. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for Oxanne for helping me through this and make it maybe make halfway sense. It's such a complicated process. I think each year we learn more and get better, but as long as we're operating in this kind of a system, we're never going to have a really thoughtful, deliberative process that we deserve. We need a paid legislature with paid staff, much longer sessions, and with time for discussion and deliberation and point, counterpoint, and disputation of false assertions done in a methodical way, and surfacing positive things in a positive way. You know, the evidence needs to really be brought to the front and not just buried in a 1-minute comment. We have an awful lot of great legislators doing the very best they can under conditions that simply must change. The decisions they make are much too important for this. So I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe and healthy, and please do stay engaged. It's the only way we fix this mess.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back next week. Bye-bye. 28:30, it's half a minute.